15.
I'm just putting that so I don't mess up time-wise. What I wanted to talk to you about is abused children. And I don't want this to be a miserable 15 minutes, because they're some of the most inspirational and extraordinary kids I've had the privilege of working with for the last 14 years. 14 years ago, I started in some railway arches in Camberwell, and we didn't have any money. There were a lot of amazing people who helped us all the way, and some of them are here now, so I'm very grateful to them. Now, we're taking care of 14,000 children. We've got 336 paid staff, 5,600 volunteers, and 97% of the children self-refer because someone in their lives is causing them great pain. The majority of the children are deeply loyal to their carers, and it's taken an extraordinary step of courage to leave the family home and seek out our centres. And I'm talking about little boys and girls who arrive aged 11, 12. They're already being couriered as drug couriers. Some of them are already in prostitution. Talking about children who've been chronically sexually and physically abused. I'm talking about little toddlers who sometimes are so hungry that they draw pictures of food on pieces of paper and then they chew and swallow them. I wish I was talking about a developing country, but I'm talking about Britain today. I'm talking about the fact that what I've seen at street level isn't the exception. There are 1.5 million children in this country currently being abused and neglected. These are not my figures. They're the New Economics Foundation in Action for Children. There are 1.1 million children in this country who are struggling with mental health difficulties. We spend 298 million a year just locking up 3,000 children at any given time. And the difficulty we have, the reason we're not solving this problem, is because we're not really thinking about it properly. We have become very, very lazy about the way we think about disturbed children. Just as our science and our literature and our history is progressing, we're not making very much progress around the issue of vulnerable children. And the premise with which we operate is that these children somehow are morally flawed, that they choose to do something wrong, and that if we punish them, then they will learn not to do wrong again. And it's in this construct that we deal with the most disturbed children. The truth is, if you dig at the figures a bit, you realize that actually the majority of crimes in this country are being committed by 5% of children who have chronic mental health difficulties. And they're sort of dismissed under this title called conduct disorder. The 5% conduct disordered children commit more crime than 45% of the public. And then if you dig a little bit more deeply, you realize that actually 90% of children who are in prison suffer from mental health difficulties, and that systematically we have had a reoffending rate of 80% with every year that we've locked up children. If this was a heart hospital and it had an 80% failure rate, we would have shut it by now. But we don't do anything about these exceptionally vulnerable children, because the truth is that the child who's being abused behind closed doors never bothers us, the voter. We only notice these children when they become incredibly disturbed and start damaging our property and start attacking our children. And at that point, the community is mobilized. But the community and the politicians are mobilized for completely the wrong reasons. they're mobilized, in effect, to protect the voter. And I'm not against protecting people who've been victimized. I'm aspiring for all of us to work together so that there are less victims. But the point is that the politicians endeavor to pacify the voters, address the voters' anger and rage in relation to children who are harming their property, but we never get round to solving the problem properly. Now, I have a suggestion. My suggestion is that we need to come up with a paradigm shift. We need to think a little bit more intelligently about this problem. And the proposal that I'd like to put to you, which we've gathered international trauma specialists to research, is that these children who are chronically violent and challenging and difficult may have a problem other than simply being morally flawed. There may be something else that's driving this chronic level of difficulty in these children. And what I think might be happening, and this I learned as I worked at street level with all the children that I met over the years, and they shared some of the most intimate stories with me of their childhoods. What I think is happening is that chronic levels of abuse and neglect are actually altering the structure and the functioning of these children's brains, to the point where the child is getting biased towards operating through violence. But the bias is not perverse in itself. It's actually an intelligent adaptation to the conditions into which they're born. And this is what I want to describe to you. Basically, the reason you're sitting here calmly and able to listen to me is because you're continuously regulating your emotions and your energy. You're using the front part of your brain, your frontal lobe, to balance out and regulate the emotional parts of your brain, which are deep inside your brain, your limbic system. So as your limbic system comes up with agitated thoughts, your frontal lobe comes along and modifies it because of the pro-social kind of training, communication, and care that you've had. Our frontal lobe gets programmed because of the quality of love and care that we've been at the receiving end of. What makes the frontal lobe of a child or an individual robust is the fact that they've had a significant carer who's consistently reflected them back as a human being and illustrated through experience what good quality interactions feel like and should be like, and has illustrated through experience what negative behavior, kind of negative consequences it leads to. But with a child who's born into conditions where the mother and the father, on their own or together, are struggling with their own survival, what you get is two parallel human beings, the adult and the child, just preoccupied with mere survival, because they're exposed to such levels of horrific uncertainty, danger, and risk. I'm talking about children who were stabbed, children who saw their mother's head cracked open with a machete. I'm talking about constant conditions of fright. What happens is the baby, the child, is abandoned, and their ability to conceptualize themselves as a person and their ability to self-soothe and self-calm, which would have been given by a maternal carer, isn't available to them. So they emerge incapacitated in their ability to calm themselves down. Then what happens is, as the child is chronically terrified and in conditions of extreme fright, they're wondering what will happen next. Are they going to get kicked? Are they going to get stabbed? What's the next horrific thing that's going to happen to them? The child releases vast amounts of adrenaline, which is the fright hormone. And this fright hormone kind of goes straight to the emotional centers of the brain. And whilst the fright hormone is simultaneously released and the terrible event takes place, the fright hormone comes along, encapsulates this terrible event, and memorizes it in an intricate way, and then delivers it to the emotional centers of the brain. So the children are banking traumatic memories, and because they're too small and they can't take revenge, you've got a 4-year-old who's lying there thinking, I wish I could kill him, I want to stab him. I want to do something to her for the harm she's causing me. But the limbs are too small. They can't deliver it. But they bank the revenge. And in this way, very, very young children are incubated in conditions of extreme terror. They're deprived of the ability to calm themselves down. They start being hyper-agitated, they can't sit still, and their compulsion is to release this energy that builds up in the emotional centers of their brain by being violent. Violence becomes a soothing mechanism. It becomes a perverse maternal experience for children who have been deprived of that maternal love and care. Take this child. He's driven, she's driven by compulsions towards violence. This child can't even get round to thinking. This child is programmed for violence. And then we take this child and we release this child as a teenager into our inner cities where the currency of crime and violence tells that child how they're supposed to survive. Be top dog because the underdog gets abused. Be violent because your reputation for violence ensures your survival. And in this way, you get a cocktail of a toxic meeting point between a sort of neurobiologically disturbed child and conditions of perverse economic circumstances in which these children are surviving. This child knows violence intimately. This child is suicidally brave. When your child comes along to occupy the same public spaces, this child's inclination is to victimize because he needs to be reminded that he is top dog and he's no longer that 4-year-old being chronically abused and neglected. Along comes our value system and we say, I'm just going to punish you. I'm going to give you a sentence, and after your sentence you're going to learn to do well. But the point is that the challenge these children are experiencing is that they can't regulate. They can't balance anything out. You can lock them up as much as you want. You're not teaching them the experience of soothing. You're not dealing with the trauma that's stored in there. You're not doing anything of the reparation that is needed to effect recovery. What does it look like? It looks like this. 550,000 children a year in this country are referred to child protection systems, but only about 35 are placed on the child protection register and given a social worker. A social worker will have 24 of these cases and will only get round to seeing 4 of them a week if they're lucky. It looks like 30,000 children on a waiting list for mental health intervention. The maximum a child like this can get help in this country is 4 months of therapeutic support if they're lucky enough to get in through the door. 4 months, once a week, 30 minutes is hardly enough to do the brain reparation that's needed. So to conclude, what I suggest we do is that we understand that the primary crisis of these children is the lack of kind of family experience, but on a more profound level, just behavioral, on a level of teaching them how to manage their neurophysiological condition and challenges. I'm not talking about apologizing for children who commit crime. I'm talking about giving children realistic, clinical, intellectual property with which they can begin the work of reparation and the work of taking responsibility. So I suggest we create centers at street level which are open 7 days a week from 10 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. I suggest we have key workers available on the phone, and what we do is we collectively, at a community level, reparent these most disturbed children. That is what Kids Company turned into. We became a substitute reparenting experience. We took the 60% of the children who were not registered with GPs to GPs. We took them to the dentist. We got them to university. We sat there and did homework with them, and we taught them how to recover. Trauma does not go away. But believe me, for 14 years, I've seen children with incredible courage overcome the challenges that trauma poses for them and enter society in a legitimate way. We do great wrong by continuing to deliver service structures which are completely flawed. And we do these children great disservice by continuously protesting about how badly behaved they are when we don't reflect the mirror back on ourselves and explain to ourselves, how is it that in one of the richest countries of the world, 550,000 children have to fight for protection, and then even when they end up on that register, because government wants to keep the child protection register low, almost all of them are deregistered within the year. So my proposal to you is, please, please, you're some of the most creative, some of the most intelligent, some of the most thoughtful individuals that this society has had the privilege of creating. Together, you've got to refuse to accept child abuse as a normality. And we can't continue blaming children for what in effect is our mistakes. Thank you very much.